In the far reaches of the Andromeda Galaxy, beyond the sight of even Earth's most powerful telescopes, the Valkyra homeworld gleamed like a jewel among the stars. This planet, named Thaler, was the heart of a sprawling empire ruled by an ancient race of warrior women. These women, known as the Valkyra, were towering figures of strength and discipline, bred for battle and conquest. Their society was built on the core principles of honor, war, and dominance. For centuries, they had expanded their territory, conquering planets, solar systems, and even entire star clusters. Few races dared to challenge them. At the head of this mighty empire was General Arena, a fearsome leader whose name was whispered with awe across the galaxy. With her flowing silver hair, piercing violet eyes, and skin the color of the deep ocean, she was a commanding presence. Her battle record was spotless, and she had led the Valkyra through countless victories. Her name was synonymous with invincibility. But now, the Valkyra were bored. They had defeated every major opponent in their sector, leaving them with no worthy adversaries. It was in this boredom that Arena had agreed to a peculiar mission, a reconnaissance trip to an insignificant planet on the fringes of their map's Earth. "Earth," Arena said, sitting in her command chair aboard the sleek silver battlecruiser, Leia. "What a pitiful little rock." "Indeed," General Sora, her second-in-command, replied with a smirk. "Their technology is primitive, their defenses laughable. They're no more advanced than the lizards we wiped out on Chloros 4. Arena glanced at the holographic map displaying Earth and its neighboring planets. To her, it was just a speck, a small blue dot floating in the vastness of space. She knew Earth's history, a planet torn by wars and conflict, populated by a species that had barely managed to escape their atmosphere in flimsy metal capsules. Compared to the Valkyra, who had mastered faster than light travel eons ago, humans were little more than children playing with toys. "They call themselves humans," Arena mused, aloud, her tone dripping with amusement. "They sound so fragile, so insignificant. How they've managed to survive this long in the cosmos is beyond my understanding." The other Valkyra on the bridge chuckled in agreement. They had been monitoring Earth's communications, broadcasts, and signals. They found humanity's obsession with entertainment, material wealth, and trivial conflicts laughable. The Valkyra, in contrast, lived for the thrill of battle and the pursuit of victory. Arena rose from her chair, her violet eyes gleaming. "We shall pay them a visit. They may not be worthy of our conquest, but it will be amusing to see their faces when they realize just how small they are in the grand scheme of the universe." With a simple hand gesture, Arena commanded the Valoria to descend. The ship hummed to life, its engines glowing as it accelerated toward Earth. The vessel was a thing of beauty and terror, a sleek war machine equipped with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. It shimmered as it cut through the void, its cloaking field allowing it to pass undetected through Earth's defense systems. As the ship neared the outer atmosphere, the crew gathered on the bridge, eagerly awaiting their first glimpse of this primitive world. A holographic view of Earth appeared before them, a swirl of blue oceans, green landmasses, and white clouds. "They are so unaware," Sora sneered, her arms folded across her chest. "We could destroy them all before they even knew we were here." Arena, however, wasn't interested in destruction, at least not yet. "Let them see us first. Let them feel the weight of our presence." The Valoria pierced through the atmosphere, its cloaking field shimmering and dropping away as it descended toward Earth. The ship sliced through the sky like a falling star, its sleek, metallic body gleaming in the sunlight. The Valkyra watched with amusement as Earth's primitive radar systems began to pick up their presence. Alarms blared across military bases, and jets were scrambled to intercept. "They think their machines can stop us," Sora laughed. "How quaint." Within minutes, the Valoria hovered above one of Earth's largest cities, New York. Its enormous shadow blotted out the sun, casting the city below into a state of confusion and panic. The ship's engines emitted a low humming vibration that rattled windows and shook buildings. On the streets, people looked up in horror and awe. Thousands gathered, staring at the colossal spacecraft that had suddenly appeared above their heads. Some ran, terrified of the unknown, while others stood frozen, unable to comprehend the sight before them. Arena stood at the front of the ship, her gaze fixed on the tiny figures below. The humans were as small and insignificant as she had imagined, scurrying about like ants under her feet. She found it almost humorous. "Open the bay doors," Arena commanded, her voice calm. The enormous bay doors at the bottom of the ship slowly slid open with a hiss, and a ramp extended to the ground below. Arena, Sora, and several of the elite Valkyra warriors marched down the ramp, their massive forms and shining armor creating an imposing spectacle. They moved with grace and power, every step purposeful, their eyes cold and calculating. As they reached the street, the crowd backed away, whispering in fear. The humans had never seen anything like the Valkyra before. Tall, blue-skinned warriors with eyes that glowed like stars. For a moment, there was only silence, the air thick with tension. Then Arena spoke, her voice booming through the city. "People of Earth, we are the Valkyra, conquerors of the stars. We have come to witness your world, though it is barely worth our attention. Look upon us and know that you are nothing in the grand scheme of the universe." Her words echoed through the streets, causing murmurs of fear and confusion to ripple through the crowd. The Valkyra warriors smirked, enjoying the humans' terrified reactions. "They are so fragile," Sora whispered, her eyes scanning the crowd. "So pathetic." But as Arena surveyed the humans, her gaze was drawn to something unexpected, a figure standing still amidst the chaos. A man, unlike the others, was watching them with a calm, almost defiant look in his eyes. He didn't run or cower like the others. Instead, he stood tall, his eyes locked on hers. "Interesting," Arena muttered, her curiosity piqued. This human was different. Perhaps Earth was not as pathetic as she had thought. The streets of New York were gripped by chaos, people screaming and scattering as the enormous Valkyra battlecruiser Valeria loomed overhead like a harbinger of doom. Helicopters circled cautiously, and the roar of military jets could be heard in the distance. But they all seemed insignificant against the vast size and power of the alien ship. Sirens blared throughout the city as police forces and emergency responders struggled to maintain order. Their efforts were futile against the overwhelming presence of the Valkyra warriors. General Arena, her glowing violet eyes surveying the scene, stood at the base of the ramp, flanked by her elite guard. Their armor gleamed under the sunlight, making them look like invincible gods descended from the heavens. The humans kept their distance, but a thick tension filled the air, and the expressions of terror painted across the crowd fed the Valkyra's amusement. "Look at them," Sora said, a grin spreading across her face. "Scurrying around like insects. They know nothing of war, of strength." Arena nodded. The humans' feeble attempts to react, to mount some sort of defense, were laughable. She raised her hand, signaling the Valkyra to spread out. They moved through the streets, towering over the panicked civilians, examining Earth's inhabitants like curious animals. The Valkyra didn't care for plundering or violence. They had already deemed Earth too insignificant for full conquest. This was purely a demonstration of their superiority, a lesson to remind these lesser beings of their place in the galaxy. The blade glowed with an intense, almost blinding light, humming as it cut through the air, its presence powerful enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Irina gripped the hilt with ease, her muscles flexing under the weight of the weapon. She looked at David with a predatory gleam in her eyes. David stood his ground, his eyes never leaving hers. His posture was calm, though every muscle in his body was prepared for what was to come. He had faced much, but this was unlike anything he had encountered before. An alien warrior, a being of unimaginable strength, with a weapon capable of cutting through the strongest materials like butter. And yet, here he was, facing her with unwavering resolve. The crowd, a mix of humans and Valkyra soldiers, stood frozen, caught in a moment of intense anticipation. Even the most battle-hardened of the Valkyra watched in silence, intrigued by the unfolding scene. This was no ordinary human, and Irina, their leader, was not one to show interest in something she deemed unworthy. "Let's see if you can truly stand your ground," Irina said, her voice smooth and filled with dark amusement. David didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you." "Good," Irina said, raising her energy blade high. In an instant, she moved with the speed of a lightning strike, her body a blur as she closed the distance between them. The blade swung down with the force of a thunderclap, aiming directly for David's head. David reacted just in time, stepping to the side and narrowly avoiding the lethal swing. The energy blade sliced through the air where he had been a fraction of a second before, sending a shockwave that rattled the nearby buildings. The power of the strike left the air crackling, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. Irina smiled, the thrill of the battle lighting up her eyes. "Impressive," she murmured, then spun with terrifying speed to bring the blade around for a horizontal strike. David, his heart racing, but his mind focused, ducked under the swing and leapt back, creating distance between them. He could feel the heat from the blade as it passed just inches from his face. There was no time to think, only to react. "You are fast," he said, catching his breath. "But strength is more than just speed and power." Irina's smile deepened. "You speak as if you know something of strength. But you do not understand what you are up against, human." With that, Irina charged again, this time with even greater ferocity, her blade flashing like a comet in the sky as she swung it at him again and again. Each strike was a test, pushing David to his limits, but he parried and dodged with everything he had. The battle raged on in silence, broken only by the clash of energy against air, the ground cracking under their feet with each collision. Irina was relentless, testing David's endurance, his reactions, and his resolve. But David's training, his years of combat experience, kept him steady. He wasn't just dodging anymore. He was anticipating her moves, countering, and even making small advances of his own. At one point, he managed to sidestep an overhead strike and grab Irina's wrist, forcing her to pause as their eyes locked for a brief moment. For the first time, Irina was the one surprised. The crowd gasped, unable to believe what they were seeing. The Valkyra, their greatest warrior, temporarily held by a mere human. But Irina quickly recovered, her strength surging as she broke free, twisting her body with a fluid motion. She spun, her blade slashing horizontally, and David barely managed to dive to the side. the blade missing him by a hair's breadth. "You have some skill, Earthling," Arena said, panting slightly now. "But it is not enough." David smiled, though sweat dripped from his brow. "We'll see about that." The tension in the air was palpable. The battle was far from over, and both warriors knew it. The audience, both human and Valkyra, watched in awe as the impossible unfolded before them. No one could have predicted that a human would stand up to the might of the Valkyra, let alone keep up with their greatest warrior. Arena stepped back for a moment, her violet eyes scanning David as though she were recalculating everything she thought she knew about this world. "You are different," she admitted, a trace of something new in her voice, respect, maybe. David didn't respond right away. His chest heaved with every breath, and his muscles screamed for rest, but he didn't back down. He couldn't. Not now. Not after everything he had done to get to this point. Arena's eyes narrowed again, but this time it wasn't with the same arrogance. There was a flicker of something else, curiosity. She had seen strength in many forms, but this human, David Kane, was something she hadn't expected. With a small nod, Arena stepped forward once more, but this time her posture had changed. She wasn't just testing him anymore. She was beginning to understand. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was ready to acknowledge what he was showing her, that Earth and its people were not as insignificant as she had thought. As the fight continued, the crowd's murmur grew louder, the tension thick in the air. For the first time since her arrival, Arena wondered if she had underestimated the humans. Perhaps they were not as weak as she had believed. Perhaps this planet, this Earth, had more to offer than she could have imagined. But as the fight raged on, one thing was certain: the encounter between David Kane and General Arena was far from over. It was only just beginning. Energy extended from the hilt of Arena's blade, its light casting a glow over her face, highlighting her determined expression. "Very well," she said. "Let us begin." Without warning, Arena surged forward, her movements a blur faster than any human could naturally perceive. Yet David reacted instinctively, his years of combat experience guiding him. He sidestepped her initial strike, the energy blade slicing through the air where he had stood moments before. The crowd gasped, cameras from news crews capturing the astonishing scene and broadcasting it live around the world. People watched from their homes, bars, and public squares, eyes glued to screens as the impossible unfolded before them. Arena spun gracefully, bringing her blade around in a sweeping arc. David ducked, feeling the heat of the blade as it passed overhead. He retaliated with a swift kick aimed at her midsection. His foot connected with her armor, the impact jarring but ultimately ineffective. She raised an eyebrow. "Impressive reflexes," she admitted, "but you'll need more than that." Arena intensified her assault, launching a series of rapid strikes. David evaded each one with a combination of agility and anticipation. He noticed that while she was incredibly fast and strong, her fighting style was direct, perhaps overconfident. As the duel continued, David began to adapt, looking for patterns in her movements, timing in her attacks. He realized that if he could predict her next move, he might find an opening. Arena feinted to the left before swinging to the right. David anticipated the maneuver, stepping inside her guard. Seizing the moment, he delivered a powerful elbow strike to her shoulder joint, aiming for a gap in her armor. The impact made Arena stumble back a step. Surprise flashed across her face. No one had ever managed to land a blow on her in close combat, let alone a human. "You're full of surprises," she remarked, her tone tinged with genuine respect. "Likewise," David replied, breathing steadily. Around them, The Valkyra warriors exchanged uncertain glances. Sora's expression darkened. "General, this has gone on long enough," she called out. "Allow me to assist." Arena shot her a sharp look. "Stand down, Sora. This is my fight." Resuming her focus on David, Arena adjusted her stance. She recognized that brute force would not suffice. This human required a different approach. To everyone's astonishment, she deactivated her energy blade and set the hilt aside. "A fair fight," she declared. David nodded, appreciating the gesture. They circled each other, each assessing the other's weaknesses. Arena made the first move, launching a swift kick aimed at David's torso. He blocked it with his forearm, the force sending a shockwave up his arm. He countered with a jab toward her midsection, which she parried effortlessly. The exchange intensified, each motion fluid and precise. Arena's strength was undeniable, but David's adaptability kept him in the fight. He leveraged his smaller size to his advantage, slipping under her strikes and targeting vulnerable spots. Minutes felt like hours as the duel wore on. Sweat beaded on David's brow, but he maintained his composure. Arena, too, showed signs of exertion, a sheen on her skin, a slight quickening of her breath. "You're holding back," David said between exchanges. "Perhaps," she admitted. "But so are you," he replied, a smile creeping onto his face. "Maybe we're both looking for the same thing." She paused momentarily, lowering her guard. "And what is that?" "Understanding," David said. Arena regarded him thoughtfully. "You fight not just with your body, but with your mind. It's rare." Before she could continue, David seized the opportunity. He moved swiftly, closing the distance between them. He executed a sweep kick aimed at her legs, catching her off guard. Arena stumbled, losing her balance. She recovered quickly but found David's fist stopping inches from her face. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The Valkyra warriors tensed, unsure of how to react. David withdrew his hand, stepping back to give her space. "Yield?" he asked softly. Arena's eyes widened, not in anger, but in something resembling admiration. She let out a soft laugh. "No one has ever brought me to a standstill," she confessed. "First time for everything," he replied. She straightened, a newfound respect evident in her gaze. "You are a remarkable warrior, David Kane. Your species may be more than we anticipated." Sora approached cautiously. "General, this is highly irregular. We cannot." Arena silenced her with a glance. "Enough, Sora. This duel has served its purpose." Turning back to David, she extended her hand, a universal gesture of respect. "You have earned my acknowledgement." He accepted her hand, their grips firm. "And you have mine." The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a sense of mutual recognition. The crowd began to cheer, the sound growing louder as the realization of what had transpired sank in. Around the world, viewers celebrated the unexpected outcome, a human standing as an equal with an alien warrior. Arena released his hand and addressed both the Valkyra and the humans present. "Today, we have learned that strength is not solely measured by might, but also by spirit and resolve. We came here believing you were weak, but we see now that you possess qualities worthy of respect." Sora looked conflicted but ultimately deferred to her general's judgment. The other Valkyra murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement. David took a step forward. "Perhaps there's more we can learn from each other." Arena considered his words. "Perhaps there is much about your world that intrigues me." At that moment, a high-ranking military officer stepped forward from the human side. On behalf of Earth, we extend an invitation for diplomatic relations, he said cautiously. Arena glanced at David, then back at the officer. Diplomacy was not our initial intent, she admitted. But circumstances have changed. Sora interjected. General, our protocols will be revised. Arena stated firmly. Prepare a communication to High Command. Inform them that Earth is not to be engaged militarily. Sora bowed her head, accepting the order. As you command. The atmosphere shifted, further hope replacing fear. Arena turned to David once more. It seems our encounter has altered the course of events. He smiled. For the better, I hope. She returned the smile subtly. I believe so. As the Valkyra began to regroup, preparations were made for formal discussions. Temporary communication channels were established between the Valkyra ship and Earth's leaders. Scientists and diplomats eagerly awaited the chance to engage with the alien visitors. The sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the city. The day's events had changed everything. Humanity had not only made first contact with an advanced alien race, but had also earned their respect. Before returning to the Valkyra ship, Arena spoke privately with David. You have shown me that even the smallest voice can echo loudly. He nodded. And you've shown me that even the mightiest warriors can seek understanding over conquest. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Perhaps there is hope for a future where our peoples stand together. One step at a time, he replied. She extended her hand once more. Until we meet again, David Kane. He shook her hand warmly. Safe travels, General. With that, she joined her warriors as they ascended the ramp back into their ship. The Valkyra vessel, the Valoria, began to rise, its engines humming softly. The crowd watched in silence, a mix of relief and wonder on their faces, as the ship vanished into the sky. David stood among his fellow humans, a quiet hero who had changed the fate of his world, not with weapons, but with courage and respect. The departure of the Valoria left the city in an eerie silence, as if the entire world was collectively holding its breath. The massive ship had ascended beyond the atmosphere, vanishing from sight, but the impact of what had just occurred remained, changing the course of history. The memory of the Valkyra's presence lingered on the streets of New York. People slowly emerged from their hiding places, unsure of what to do now that the impossible encounter had ended. David Kane stood in the middle of the street, still feeling the weight of everything that had just transpired. He had faced down one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy and lived to tell the tale. More than that, he had earned her respect. The memory of Arena's violet eyes meeting his just before they parted lingered in his mind. She was no ordinary enemy. In fact, she wasn't an enemy at all anymore. Around him, military personnel and law enforcement officers moved quickly to secure the area. Sirens wailed in the distance, and helicopters hovered above, keeping watch. David could see groups of government officials and scientists already descending on the scene, eager to piece together what had just happened. But David knew that this was only the beginning. An officer approached him, looking dazed but composed. David Kane, sir. The president has requested an immediate briefing. You need to come with us. David nodded, though his mind was still spinning from the encounter. As he followed the officer to a waiting convoy, he caught one last glimpse of the sky, wondering if the Valkyra were still up there, watching. Hours later, David found himself standing in the Oval Office, the weight of the situation beginning to sink in. The President of the United States, along with several top military officials and advisors, were seated around him, listening intently as David recounted every detail of his duel with General Arena. The air in the room was thick with tension. "So you're telling me that these Valkyra decided not to invade because you won some kind of fight?" one of the generals asked skeptically. "It wasn't about winning," David replied calmly. "It was about proving that Earth isn't as weak as they thought. Arena wasn't looking for a war. She was looking to test us, to see if we were worth her time." The president leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "And what do you believe? Do you think this General Arena can be trusted?" David paused, considering the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally. "I do. She may be a warrior, but she's not reckless. She respects strength, and she respects those who stand up for themselves. If we approach them with respect and show them that we're willing to cooperate, I think we can avoid any conflict." A murmur rippled through the room as the advisors exchanged glances. The idea of negotiating with an alien race was both thrilling and terrifying. Earth had never been in a situation like this before. The president nodded, absorbing the information. "And you think we should initiate formal diplomacy with these Valkyra?" "I think it's our best chance," David replied. "They didn't come here to destroy us. If we handle this right, we might have an opportunity to form an alliance, one that could change the future of our world." The president sat back in his chair, deep in thought. Finally, he looked up. "Very well. We'll proceed cautiously. I want our top diplomats working on this immediately. David, you've done an incredible service for your country and for the world. We'll need you to remain closely involved in these discussions." David nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what his role would be going forward. He had never imagined that one day he'd be negotiating peace with alien warriors. But the world had changed in a matter of hours, and nothing felt certain anymore. As the meeting adjourned, David walked out of the Oval Office, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. Outside the White House, the media frenzy was already in full swing. Reporters clamored for information, eager to hear every detail about the first confirmed encounter with extraterrestrial life. But David was too drained to pay them much attention. All he wanted was some quiet. Far above Earth, aboard the Valeria, General Arena stood before a holographic display, her eyes focused on the image of Earth below. She had returned to her command post, but her thoughts were still on the man she had faced earlier that day, David Kane. In all her years of conquest and battle, no one had ever made her question her assumptions the way he had. Sora approached from behind her, expression tense. "The High Command has received our report, General. They are perplexed by your decision to halt the invasion." Arena turned slowly, her face calm but firm. Sora nodded. "They do not understand why you would choose diplomacy over domination. Some members of the Council are concerned that Earth may not be worthy of our time." Arena's gaze hardened. "Then they are fools. Earth is more than it appears. I have seen something in its people and their will to survive, their resilience. They are not like the other species we have encountered." Sora hesitated. "Do you truly believe they could be valuable allies?" Arena considered this for a moment. "Perhaps they have strength that goes beyond physical power. If they can harness that strength, they may become a force worth aligning with. The Valkyra have ruled through conquest for centuries, but perhaps it is time we sought out partnerships instead of enemies." Sora's brow furrowed. "The Council may resist such ideas." "Let them," Arena said coolly. "I will not ignore what I have learned here. Earth has potential, and I intend to see what that potential holds." There was a long silence between them before Sora finally spoke again. "What of this human, David Kane? You seemed particularly interested in him." Arena's expression softened slightly, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "He is different. He is a warrior in his own way, though not in the way we expected. He understands strength, not as brute force, but as determination and adaptability. I believe he may be the key to understanding Earth." Sora looked skeptical but did not argue. "What will our next move be?" "We will return to Thaler and report to the Council," Arena said. "Then we will open formal channels with Earth's leaders. This is no longer a conquest, Sora. This is the beginning of something new." Days later, back on Earth, David Kane found himself standing in front of an international delegation. Representatives from the United Nations, heads of state, and scientists from every corner of the globe had gathered to discuss the Valkyra. David had been asked to speak, not as a soldier, but as a diplomat, the man who had faced down an alien general and brokered peace. "The world is watching," one of the diplomats said to him as they prepared for the session. "You've become a symbol of hope for billions." David smiled, though the weight of those words was not lost on him. "I didn't do this alone," he said quietly. "We all have a part to play in what comes next." As the session began, David stood before the assembly, feeling the eyes of the world upon him. The Valkyra had not returned since their departure, but communication channels had been established. The first steps toward diplomacy had been taken, and humanity now stood on the threshold of a new era, one filled with possibility, but also uncertainty. "The Valkyra are not our enemies," David began, his voice steady and clear. "They are warriors, yes, but they are also beings capable of reason and respect. They came here expecting to find weakness, but what they found was resilience. And because of that, we have an opportunity to forge a future not defined by fear, but by cooperation." The room was silent, every word hanging in the air. "As we move forward," David continued, "we must remember that strength isn't just about power. It's about standing together, about finding common ground even when the odds seem insurmountable. The Valkyra have given us a chance, and it's up to us to make the most of it." Applause erupted from the assembly. David stepped back, the weight of the moment finally lifting from his shoulders. He had no way of knowing what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: Earth was no longer alone in the universe. As the applause continued, David allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. His eyes drifted upward toward the sky, where he imagined the Valkyra watching from their distant homeworld. He wondered if somewhere Arena was looking back at Earth with the same sense of curiosity and hope. Far beyond the stars, aboard the Valeria, General Arena stood on the command deck, gazing at a holographic image of Earth. She smiled faintly, her thoughts returning to the day she had met David Kane. "Until we meet again," she whispered softly. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Valkyra vessel shot forward into the infinite expanse of space, leaving Earth behind but not forgotten.